There is a lamp burning on a table in Ephesus. The city is loud outside. Merchants, soldiers, the smell of salt air off the harbor. But in this room, an old man is sitting alone with parchment in front of him, and he is thinking about what to leave out. He has been thinking about it for decades. His name, he will not write. Not once in the entire document he is about to produce. He knows what the other three have already written. He has read Matthew's careful genealogy tracing Jesus back to Abraham. He has read Mark's urgent, breathless account, a gospel that moves so fast it uses the word immediately 41 times. He has read Luke's meticulous history, the work of a man who interviewed eyewitnesses and organized everything in order. The basic story of Jesus has been told well, told in detail. And this old man, the last eyewitness still breathing, is about to leave out 90% of it. No birth in Bethlehem, no shepherds in the field, no wise men with their gifts, no Sermon on the Mount, arguably the most famous sermon any human being has ever delivered. No parables. 30 parables in Matthew, more in Luke. 0 in John. No exorcisms. No temptation in the wilderness. No transfiguration on the mountain. And the Last Supper, the meal that would become the center of Christian worship for 2,000 years across Catholic, Orthodox, and Protestant traditions. John records the meal, but not the bread and the wine. He leaves it all out. The question is why? And the answer, when you finally see it, changes how you read every chapter he wrote. This is not a book about what Jesus did. This is not a timeline of events. This is not even a biography in any ordinary sense. This is a question, dressed in the form of a gospel, aimed at you. And the old man tells you so himself near the end of the book, in words almost no ancient author ever wrote, a direct statement of purpose. He writes, "These things are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name." Luke, writing his gospel, had also stated a purpose: to give his readers certainty about the things they had been taught. That is a historian's goal: accurate, ordered, reliable. John's goal is different. John is not trying to give you a timeline. He is trying to produce something inside of you. And he already knows you. Or rather, he knows the kind of person who will eventually hold this book. Someone who has heard the story, maybe many times. Someone who knows where the manger goes and where the cross goes and how the resurrection fits into the outline. Someone who has had all the right answers for so long that the answers stopped sounding like answers. He wrote this gospel for you. We will get to the old man's name for himself before this video is done. He waits until almost the final chapter to use it, and when he does, it stops the room. But not yet. First, where he begins. Matthew opens with a genealogy, a list of names stretching 42 generations back to Abraham, designed to show Jesus as the fulfillment of a promise made to the father of the Jewish nation. Mark opens at a river, John the Baptist in the Jordan, a voice in the wilderness, and Jesus stepping into the water. Luke opens in a temple, a priest named Zechariah burning incense at the altar, the smell of holy smoke, a sudden appearance, an announcement. John opens before any of that, before the river, before the temple, before Abraham, before the stars existed. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him, nothing was made that was made. 5 verses in, and the scale of the claim already exceeds anything the other 3 Gospels attempt in their opening chapters. The Greek word John uses, the word we translate as word, is logos. And logos is doing far more work than the English word can carry. In Greek philosophy, logos was the term for the rational principle behind the universe, the reason, the ordering intelligence that held everything together. Greek thinkers had been reaching toward this idea for 5 centuries. They believed the universe was not random, that behind the motion of the stars and the seasons and the turning of the world, there was a mind, a logos. They could name it. They could not find it. In the Hebrew scriptures, something parallel was happening, but with a completely different engine. God's word was not a philosophical abstraction. It was a creative force. By the word of the Lord, the heavens were made. When God spoke in Genesis chapter 1, things happened. Light appeared. Seas separated. Life began. The Hebrew word davar means both word and thing, because in the Hebrew imagination, what God speaks and what God creates are the same act. John takes both streams, the Greek philosophical tradition and the Hebrew theological tradition, and says, the thing you have been searching for and the thing you have been hearing about are the same reality. And then he says something neither tradition expected. He says the logos is not an idea. It is not a force. It is not a principle behind the universe. It is a person. And the word became flesh and dwelt among us. John chapter 1, verse 14. That is the collision point. Everything before it, in the beginning, with God, all things made through him, is stacking weight. And then the floor drops. The mind behind the universe put on a body. The force that holds atoms together learned to walk. Whatever you expected from a sacred text, it was probably not that. Here is what most people miss. After the prologue, John makes a choice that separates his gospel from every other account, and it hides inside a single Greek word. Matthew, Mark, and Luke describe Jesus' supernatural acts using the Greek word dunamis, power, mighty works. It is the word behind our English word dynamite. A dunamis says, look how powerful that was. Be amazed by what just happened. John never uses that word, not once, in his entire gospel. When he describes water becoming wine, a blind man seeing, a dead man walking out of a tomb, he reaches for a completely different word, semaion, sign. The difference is not vocabulary preference. It is intent. A miracle points to itself. A sign points somewhere else. And John selects exactly 7 of them. 7 signs arranged in deliberate escalation, changing a substance, healing at a distance, reversing 38 years of disability, multiplying matter from almost nothing, commanding the physics of water, giving sight to a man who had been born blind, not injured, not diseased, but born without the ability to see. And finally, raising a man 4 days dead from his tomb. Each sign reaches further than the last. Each one presses into territory the previous one had not touched. John is building a case. And the case is not, Jesus can do impressive things. The case is this. This person has authority over every category of reality. Matter, distance, time, nature, biology, death itself. What kind of person has that authority? And after each sign, John does something the other Gospels almost never do. He records a long conversation where Jesus explains what the sign meant. The bread was multiplied. Jesus says, I am the bread of life. The man born blind receives his sight. Jesus says, I am the light of the world. Lazarus is raised from the dead. Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. The sign is never the point. It is the door. And Jesus walks you through it into a claim about himself that the miracle alone could never carry. Pay attention to this. Watch what happens to the crowds as the signs progress. At the wedding in Cana, his disciples believe. After the feeding of 5,000, the crowd tried to make him king by force. After the healing of the blind man, the religious leaders threw the healed man out of the synagogue. After Lazarus, after a man walked out of a tomb 4 days after burial, the chief priests plotted to kill not only Jesus, but Lazarus too, because too many people were believing because of him. The signs do not produce uniform results. They divide. The more clearly Jesus reveals himself, the more sharply people split into those who move toward him and those who move away. John is not recording these reactions by accident. He is showing you something important about how faith works. Evidence alone does not produce belief. Data alone does not open a heart. Something else must happen inside the person looking at the evidence. And that something, John will spend the rest of his gospel showing you, is not achieved by trying harder. It is received by staying close. But first, the most explosive section of the entire gospel. 7 statements. 7 times Jesus says, I am. And then one time, without a metaphor attached, he says something that caused the crowd to pick up stones. 7 times in John's gospel, Jesus makes a statement that begins with I am and follows it with a metaphor. I am the bread of life. Chapter 6, verse 35. I am the light of the world. Chapter 8, verse 12. I am the door. Chapter 10, verse 7. I am the good shepherd. Chapter 10, verse 11. I am the resurrection and the life. Chapter 11, verse 25. I am the way, the truth, and the life. Chapter 14, verse 6. I am the true vine. Chapter 15, verse 1. None of these appear in Matthew, Mark, or Luke. All 7 exist only in John's record. The Greek behind I am is ego eimi. And there's a detail here that anyone who knew Greek would have caught immediately. In Greek, the verb eimi already contains the subject. Saying eimi alone already means I am. Adding the pronoun ego on top of it is redundant, emphatic. It is the equivalent of saying I myself am. It carries a weight that the bare verb does not. Now look at what each of the 7 statements is connected to. Bread, light, a door, a shepherd, resurrection, the way, a vine. Every metaphor connects Jesus to something essential for survival. You cannot live without bread. You cannot move in darkness without light. You cannot enter a place without a door. You cannot find your way alone without a guide. These are not poetic additions. They are claims. Jesus is not saying he resembles these things. He is saying he is these things for you, for every person who will ever need them. But then comes John chapter 8, verse 58. Jesus is in a tense exchange with religious leaders who have been challenging his credentials. They invoke Abraham, the founding father of their entire faith, their greatest ancestor, the man who walked with God 4,000 years before this conversation. They mean it as a shutdown. Who do you think you are compared to Abraham? And Jesus says, most assuredly, I tell you, before Abraham was, I am. No predicate, no metaphor, no I am the bread or I am the shepherd. Just ego eimi standing alone. And the crowd reached for stones. Why stones? Because they understood exactly what he was claiming. And no academic degree was required to understand it. In the Greek translation of the Old Testament, the version most people in that room would have grown up hearing, the phrase ego eimi appears in a very specific set of passages. In Isaiah, God uses the Hebrew phrase ani hu, I am he, to distinguish himself from every idol, every false god, every created thing. I, even I am he, and there is no God besides me. That Anihu was rendered in Greek as ego eimi. Scholars also connected to Exodus chapter 3, where God speaks to Moses at the burning bush and says his name, I am who I am. The people standing in front of Jesus did not need to sort out the scholarly debate. They heard a human mouth say the divine name, alone, without a metaphor softening it. In ancient Israel, stoning was the prescribed punishment for blasphemy. They reached for rocks because they understood perfectly. John records their reaction. He does not soften it. He does not explain it away. He lets the stones do the talking. Here is the weight of what that means. For every person who prays to Jesus, for every Catholic who kneels before the Blessed Sacrament, for every Protestant who sings his name on a Sunday morning, for every person in a hospital bed at 3 in the morning who whispers his name in the dark. The name you are speaking is not a title given to a good teacher. It is the name that caused armed men to fall to the ground. It is the name God gave himself at a burning bush. Ego eimi, I am. And John, who was there who heard it with his own ears, wrote it down so you would know exactly who you are talking to when you pray. Stay with me, because what John chose to leave out of this gospel is almost as revealing as what he chose to put in. The pattern of what John excluded exposes his entire strategy. Gone. The temptation of Jesus in the wilderness. 40 days, the devil, 3 offers. Matthew devotes 11 verses to it. Luke devotes 13. John, nothing, gone. The transfiguration on the mountain. Peter, James, and John himself standing there while Jesus' face blazes like the sun, and Moses and Elijah appear beside him, and the voice of God thunders from a cloud. All 3 other gospels record it. John does not mention it at all, and he was there. Gone. The Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes, turn the other cheek, love your enemies, the Lord's Prayer. 8 chapters of the most transformative ethical teaching in human history, and John leaves it out entirely. Gone. Every parable Jesus ever told. Matthew records more than 30. Mark records about a dozen. Luke adds several more. John records 0. Gone. Every exorcism. In Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jesus casts out demons as a regular and visible feature of his ministry. In John, not a single one. And the Last Supper, the meal that Catholic, Orthodox, Protestant, and every branch of the Christian family has gathered around for 2,000 years. John records the meal, but not the bread and wine, where the other 3 describe Jesus taking bread, breaking it, saying, "This is my body." John describes Jesus taking a towel, pouring water into a basin, and kneeling on the floor to wash his disciples' feet, an act none of the other 3 mention. What did he put in their place? He put in the people no one expected. Nicodemus, a member of the ruling Sanhedrin, a Pharisee, a man with everything to lose, comes to Jesus at night, not in daylight where someone might see him, in the dark where questions are safer. He is not a skeptic. He is a man who knows enough to know he does not know enough, and he cannot sleep until he finds out more. John chapter 3. A woman at a well in Samaria. It is noon, the hottest part of the day, the time when no one draws water because everyone else goes in the cool of the morning. She goes alone for a reason John lets you figure out. And Jesus, a Jewish man, speaks to her in public about theology, crossing every social boundary that world had constructed. Gender, ethnicity, religion, and reputation all at once. And it is in that conversation, not in a synagogue, not on a hillside before thousands, that Jesus makes one of the clearest statements about his own identity in any gospel. I who speak to you am he. John chapter 4, verse 26. A man born blind brought before the religious authorities after Jesus healed him. They interrogate him. They question his parents. They call Jesus a sinner. They apply pressure. And this man, who has no theological training, no status, no protection, gives the simplest testimony in the entire New Testament. One thing I know, I was blind. Now I see. John chapter 9, verse 25. They throw him out of the synagogue for it, and Jesus finds him afterward. Martha, standing in front of her brother's sealed tomb. 4 days. The body has been in the ground 4 days, long enough that even hope feels inappropriate. She says to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. And Jesus says to her, not to a crowd, not to a council, but to a grieving woman standing in the dust outside a tomb, I am the resurrection and the life. John chapter 11. And Thomas, the one who demanded evidence, who said, unless I see the nail marks and put my hand into his side, I will not believe. A week after the resurrection, Jesus appears in the locked room and offers Thomas exactly what he asked for. And Thomas does not need to touch him. He falls to his knees and says words no one in any gospel has said before, my Lord and my God. The highest confession of faith in all 4 gospels, from the disciple known for doubting. Here is what I want you to see. Matthew, Mark, and Luke give you the wide shot, the crowd, the hillside, the thousands. John gives you the close-up, the room, the 2 people, the single conversation where everything is on the table. And identity reveals itself in the close-up. You learn who someone truly is not by watching them address a stadium, but by hearing what they say when there are only 2 of you in the room and the night is quiet and the questions are real. John spent 3 years in the wide shot with Jesus, and what he chose to record for you was every close-up he could remember. There is a parent, maybe you know one, maybe you are one, who watched an adult child walk away after a long and painful conversation. You could have said more, explained more, given more evidence, but you looked at them and said, the one thing that mattered, I love you. And you let them go, trusting that the love would reach further than the argument could. John did the same thing with his gospel. He stripped away 90% of the evidence and put a single question on the table. Not do you understand Jesus? Not can you pass a theology exam? Not do you know the timeline? Do you know him? There is a word in John's gospel that outweighs every other word in it. The Greek verb pisteuo, to believe, appears approximately 98 times in John. That is more than in Matthew, Mark, and Luke combined. John uses this word more than any other gospel writer by a margin that cannot be accidental. But here's the part that almost nobody catches. The noun form of the same word, pistis, meaning faith, does not appear in John at all. 0 times. Not once in 21 chapters. John refuses the noun. He uses only the verb. That distinction might look small on paper. It is not small in practice. A noun is a thing you possess, a container you can fill once and set on a shelf. Faith is something you could claim to have, write it on a church membership card, check a doctrinal box, say it in a confirmation ceremony, and never do anything with again. A verb is something you are doing right now, in this moment, or you are not. Pisteuo is present tense, active voice, in motion. You are either believing or you are not. And John engineered his entire gospel to keep it a verb. The signs are selected to provoke it. The I am statements are constructed to demand it. The private conversations, Nicodemus, the woman at the well, Thomas in the locked room, are designed to make it personal, not a crowd's response to a spectacle. One person, one moment, one step forward. When Jesus turns to Thomas in that room and says, "Do not be unbelieving, but believing," he is not asking Thomas to update a theological position. He is telling him to do something with his body and his will right now, in this moment. Step forward, reach out, trust. Pistuo is never an abstraction in this gospel. It always involves movement, moving toward Jesus, not just thinking about him. And then, in chapter 15, Jesus gives the relational counterpart to pistuo. I am the true vine. My Father is the vine dresser. Abide in me and I in you. The Greek is meno, to remain, to stay, to take up residence and refuse to leave. He says it 11 times in that single passage. Without me, you can do nothing. John 15, verse 5. Not. Without me, you will accomplish less. Not. Without me, you will struggle. Nothing. It is one of the most absolute statements Jesus makes anywhere in any gospel. And it exists only in John. Meno is the long-term form of pistuo. If pistuo is the act of leaning your weight on Jesus, meno is the act of staying leaned. Not a decision made once and filed away. An ongoing posture, a daily return, a refusal to drift. For anyone who has grown up in the church, Catholic, Protestant, Orthodox, this is the part of John that cuts the deepest, because we know how to profess faith. We know the creed, the prayer, the liturgy, the altar call. What John keeps asking is whether we are still believing, present tense, active voice, or whether we have replaced the verb with the noun and called it enough. The vine does not ask the branch to produce fruit by trying harder. It asks the branch to remain connected. The fruit is a byproduct of contact, not effort. That is a fundamentally different invitation than most people have ever been offered. Now, the Farewell Discourse, chapters 13 through 17 of John's Gospel, the longest sustained record of Jesus' private teaching anywhere in the four Gospels. Nearly every word of it exists only here. It opens with the foot washing. Jesus gets up from the table, wraps a towel around his waist, pours water into a basin, and begins to wash the feet of his disciples, one of whom is about to hand him over to be executed. In the ancient world, washing feet was the job nobody wanted. Roads were unpaved and sandals were open. By the time a guest arrived at dinner, his feet carried the dust and waste of every street he had walked through. Households with servants assigned the task to the lowest ranking one. No one of any status washed someone else's feet voluntarily. Peter's reaction is not polite discomfort. It is genuine horror. The hierarchy of the universe has inverted in front of his eyes. And this is the scene John chose to record, where the other three gospel writers recorded the bread and the wine. Not because the bread and the wine did not matter, because John wanted you to see something else about that evening. He wanted you to see what God looks like on his knees, the hands that spoke galaxies into existence, wringing out a towel. After the foot washing, Jesus speaks for 4 chapters. He tells them he is going away. He tells them not to let their hearts be troubled. He promises to prepare a place for them. He introduces a word that appears only in John's writings, nowhere else in the entire New Testament. Parakletos. It comes from 2 Greek roots, para, meaning alongside, and kaleo, meaning to call. A parakletos is someone summoned to stand beside you in a courtroom, in a crisis, in a moment when you cannot speak for yourself. In Greek legal culture, a parakletos was the person who came to your defense, not a distant advisor, someone physically present, standing next to you, speaking on your behalf. Jesus uses this word 4 times. He calls the Spirit of truth. He says the Spirit will teach them, remind them, guide them into all truth. Not a truth from outside, but truth from within, dwelling inside the person who believes. And then he says something that would have been incomprehensible if they had not heard it from his own lips. It is to your advantage that I go away. He tells 12 men who have physically walked with God in flesh and bone that something better is coming, not a replacement, an upgrade in proximity, because the Spirit will not walk beside them. The Spirit will dwell inside them. The presence of God, which until that moment had been next to them, was about to become internal. And then in chapter 17, Jesus prays, not to the disciples, not to the crowd. He prays to the Father. And in the middle of that prayer, he says this, I do not pray for these alone, but also for those who will believe in me through their word, those who will believe through the word of the apostles. That is every person who has ever come to faith through the message that began with those 12 men. That includes every Catholic who received the faith from their grandmother, every Protestant who heard it preached for the first time, every person who has ever read this gospel. Jesus prayed for you by category before he walked to the cross. He knew you were coming. He asked the Father to keep you. Now we return to the old man in Ephesus. His lamp is lower. The night is further along, and he has almost finished writing. 5 times in this gospel, he refers to himself. And every single time, he uses the same phrase, the disciple whom Jesus loved. Not the brave disciple. He had run away in the garden like the others. Not the faithful disciple. He had stood at the cross. Yes, he alone of the 12 had shown up. But he would have told you it was the women who were faithful, not him. Mary and Mary Magdalene and the others standing in the wind and the grief while the soldiers divided the clothes below. Not the disciple who understood first. He ran to the empty tomb and stopped at the entrance. The other disciple, he believes it was Peter, went in first. He does not call himself any of those things. He calls himself the one Jesus loved. And I want you to sit with why he chose that. This man had outlived everyone. Peter, martyred in Rome, crucified upside down at his own request. Paul, beheaded. James, John's own brother, executed by Herod with a sword, the first apostle to die. By the time John wrote this gospel, he had spent more years reflecting on those 3 years with Jesus than anyone else still alive. Decades of thinking, decades of prayer, decades of watching the movement grow and fracture and suffer and spread. And after all of it, after a lifetime that would have entitled him to any number of impressive titles, the defining fact of his existence was not what he had done for Jesus. It was what Jesus had done for him. He had been loved, and nothing that had happened since, no persecution, no grief, no loss, no exile on the island of Patmos, had been able to take that from him. There is a word in the English language that has been used and overused until it has almost lost its shape. Loved. We say it about coffee. We say it about films. We say it about weather. But what John means by the word is this: the person at the center of this entire gospel, the Logos, who was with God in the beginning, through whom every atom in the universe was made, who put on a body and walked through 33 years of dust and sweat and grief and betrayal, knew John's name, chose him, sat with him, washed his feet, prayed for him by category before going to a cross. That is the love behind the phrase, and it is available to everyone who reads this gospel, not just to the first 12, not only to those who were there, to those who will believe through their word, to you, if you have believed, or to you, if you are sitting with this video right now, somewhere between knowing the story and actually trusting the person at the center of it. Here is what John's gospel leaves you with. First, John did not write a biography. He wrote a courtroom. 7 signs presented as evidence. 7 I am statements as testimony. A purpose statement that names the verdict he is asking for. The question has never been, do you know the facts about Jesus? The question is, what do you do with the evidence? Second, if faith has become furniture, something you own but never use, something you inherited but never examined, John's gospel is the corrective. Not because it gives you more information, because it strips away the familiar and leaves you face to face with the person. And it refuses to let you answer from a distance. Third, and this is the one I want you to carry out of this video. After a lifetime with Jesus, after 3 years walking beside him and decades reflecting on what it meant, after watching every other apostle die for the name he had heard with his own ears at a burning bush, the word John chose for himself was not witness, not apostle, not survivor, not the last one standing. He chose loved. That identity, built on receiving, not achieving, is the identity John's gospel offers to every single person who reads it. You are not defined by your faithfulness. You are not defined by your understanding. You are not defined by whether you were brave enough to stay at the cross. You are defined by the fact that the one who made you chose you, sat with you in the dark, washed the road off your feet, prayed for you before you were born, and calls himself still your Lord and your God, which I am statement speaks to where you are right now. Bread, light, door, shepherd, resurrection, way, or vine? Tell me in the comments below. I read every one. Subscribe if this opens something in John you had not seen before. Share this with someone who has heard the story of Jesus, but has never looked at him through John's lens. And may the God who became flesh and stepped into our world meet you exactly where you are standing today. God bless you.